Good evening, everyone. We hope you're all staying at home and staying safe. I'm Gayatri Manu, the Program Associate at Science Gallery, Bengaluru, and we're so delighted to have you with us for this program, which is a part of our second exhibition season, Contagion. Contagion is completely digital, so you can experience Contagion at www.nowtransmitting.com. I'm delighted to introduce you all to Lena Bui and Fredrik Keck today, who are here with us and who are going to discuss Lena Bui's film, Where Birds Dance Their Last. Her film is extremely relevant at a moment when the world is reeling from an environmentally linked zoonotic pandemic. In this film, Lena provides a crucial perspective on the threat of bird flu by following farm workers in a village in North Vietnam where duck feathers are sorted and exported to China. Where Birds Dance Their Last touches upon various questions surrounding our consumption of animals and animal produce, changes in rural landscape, and how disease affects people beyond the aspect of health. In case you missed watching the film before joining us for this discussion, I would like to encourage you all to watch the film, which is available on our website until 13th June. Lena Bui lives and works in Saigon, Vietnam. Her works are sometimes amusing anecdotes and other times in-depth articulation of the impact of rapid development on people's relationship with nature. She reflects on the way that intangible aspects of life, such as faith, death, and dreams, influence our behavior and perception. Fredrik Keck is a senior researcher at the Laboratory of Social Anthropology. After studying philosophy at École Normale Supérieure in Paris and anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley, he has investigated the history of social anthropology and contemporary biopolitical questions raised by avian influenza. He was the director of the research department of the Musée du Quai Branly between 2014 and 2018. Before we begin the session, I would remind you all to put your questions in the Q&A box so that the discussant can answer them after the session. And I would also remind you all to fill out the feedback form, which has been put in the chat box so that we can know what worked well for this program and what we can improve going forward. Now, I would like to hand over the mic to Lena, who is just going to show us a little bit about the process of making her film, Where Birds Dance Their Last. Over to you, Lena.
Hello, thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Lena. I'm speaking from my studio in Saigon. So I would like to share a little bit about my process and the background of this work. The research was, this film was created, or rather it was a video installation, was created when I was invited as an artist in residence at the Oxford Clinical Research Unit in Ho Chi Minh City. So it's hosted by the Hospital of Tropical Disease in Saigon, and it has been in Saigon since 1991. So it's a fairly well-established research unit in Saigon. And when they have their main funder, the Wellcome Trust, initiated a project called Art in Global Health, they decided to bring an artist into the research studio and the research unit. And in a way, it was a very fruitful collaboration for me because I end up working on 3 other projects with them after this initial video. So yeah, I've been collaborating on and off with them for maybe almost 9 years now with the unit in Saigon, and also they have a unit in Nepal. What they do at the unit is they do a lot of research on antimicrobial resistance, various infectious disease like HIV, malaria, dengue, emerging disease, and also zoonosis. A part of the work involves working in the lab but some of the work also work in the field, in communities or in farms. And particularly the group zoonosis, which is the group that study infectious disease between human and animal. They go and do a lot more field works than other research groups. So I was particularly drawn to this group as a artist, and my interest is very much on human behaviors and how certain habits or certain customs occur in a community, in a culture. And especially also as someone who grew up and lived mostly in the city, I was very curious about the countryside. Um, I chose to mainly focus and work with them. And they study a variety of pathogens in animals like Streptococcus, Salmonella, E. coli, and actually a lot of their work is on antimicrobial resistance. But when you talk of like a zoonotic disease, I think what captures people's attention is the very infectious disease like bird flu or swine flu. So this is widely featured in newspapers and also have a very immediate and strong effect on daily people's lives. So I was doing research on this, and I came up on this photograph in a newspaper about the first very widespread avian flu outbreak in Vietnam in 2005. And during this period, like a lot of poultries in Vietnam were killed. So 1.2 million chickens were killed to prevent the disease from spreading. And I think the Vietnamese government has quite a lot of experience with this type of big outbreaks because we are tropical and susceptible to quite a lot of different disease outbreaks and stuff. This photo particularly is very interesting to me because it's almost like a blurring between the human and animal. This woman, she almost becomes a big bird. And so as I dig more into this location of the photograph, which is in a small village outside of Hanoi, and they have been collecting feathers for 3-4 generations, and they export it mostly to China. So they suffered a lot of damage during this outbreak, not because of people getting sick, but because of their livelihood, when China stopped accepting imports from Vietnam, and also it's just also the stigma with the job itself, because it's so visibly associated with the disease at that time. So half the village switched to doing something else. And so it's a small village, like, or used to be a small village, because this part used to be Hanoi. But now it's this whole green area, and so this part that's highlighted or like detailed here is only the small dots. So now, and the very big area here is now the municipal capital region of Hanoi. So, the metropolitan area is just expanding like crazy. So it become a very densely populated area as well. And but I'm still very interested in it because it still has retained a lot of the old traditions and old way of life, even though geographically, or like the layout and the density has increased a lot, but they kept old traditions. Like this festival has been around supposedly since the end of the 8th century. to honor a general that defeat the Tang Dynasty army. I mean, I think in India, there are so many festivals, but in Vietnam, actually, this kind of small scale village festivals are becoming less and less. Fewer and fewer places manage to retain their kind of individual custom. Mostly now, we adapt a very similar lifestyle and belief and habits. Yeah, so back to the part of the feather. So yeah, China is a huge producer of feathers and also importers because duck is a big part of their diet. So all of this very small village, and everything is sorted by hand. They go and collect feathers from wet markets around Hanoi area. Then it's transported to the border of China, where they have bigger turbines to separate the dow feather from the bigger feathers. So that was when I did the research. But recently, I looked a bit more into it, and it seems like within Vietnam, they have built some factories. So there is a shift a little bit. Yeah, but so this is one aspect, like for the virologist that works with me, then this village is really a fascinating place because they for them it's a really hot spot. Like there could be a lot of studies done here, but in term of medical research, it takes a very, very long time to set up a cohort because you have to go through a lot of clearance. But for me, as sort of a kind of a free artist, I could come as an observer. So I came and visit this place and asked the people if I could film them, and it took a few visits, but because I was working very, like, it's just me and one other friend as a camera person, so in a way we could gain access to this place. And but so that's the part that links with the science, but I want to talk about another part that I feel makes my work different from just a documentary, because I'm also very influenced by mythologies and avian humanoids, or this kind of shape-shifting figure between human and animal is something that is present in so many different folklores and mythologies throughout various cultures. And I think it's a really fascinating aspect. For example, you have this figure of in the West, it's the Swan Maiden, and in the East, it's always also usually a woman that is a swan coming from a sort of a deity or a goddess, and she comes down and has this robe of feathers which she shed, and then some immortal will fall in love with her and hide her clothes, and then she's sort of trapped. So I think this sort of the ability to fly and the form of the bird carries a lot of symbolism and meaning for people as something very mystical and magical, and also something dangerous. For example, in the Russian folklore, there's the Alkonost and the Syrian, who are like birds that sing very beautiful songs of sorrow and of joy and lure people. So even these kind of characters, their roles change through time, because at some point they are dangerous and a threat because they are irresistible in their presence and also in their songs. But at other times, they are considered sort of beings of paradise and signal something of harmony. So even throughout mythology, depending on the times and the location. So this character is present throughout the Slavic regions, and their symbols or their function changes according to the times as well. And then we also have, of course, in India, there's the Garuda, which is the vehicle of Vishnu, very, very prominent avian humanoid, and he originated from India, but is now present in all over Southeast Asia and is the symbol of national symbol of Indonesia. So we share this kind of mystical creatures and a sort of awe towards them. One creature that I was really fascinated in doing my research was the Navagunjara, a mystical creature in the Indian mythology, and it's really a very strange and bizarre mythical creature for me, because it's composed of 9 different animals. It has a rooster head, peacock neck, hump of a bull, waist of a lion, and then 3 feet standing is the elephant, the tiger, deer or cow here, and then the last feet is the hand, a human hand holding either a lotus or a wheel, and the tail is the snake. So and it's supposedly the sort of a manifestation of Krishna, and sort of the spirit of the forest, angered forest, basically appearing in front of the hero Arjuna in the Mahabharata. So I feel this kind of creatures signal a certain kind of a very primordial awe and respect towards nature, and also a relationship with it, which is, you know, always a part of nature, but also some sort of reverence to it. And so when I conceived my work, it is an installation. So it's supposed to show in a space on 2 separate walls, meaning that it should be, and these are big screens. So you walk in and you are sort of surrounded by this kind of movement of feathers and the ambient sound. So it does change the experience quite a bit when you're watching it flat side by side on the computer screen. But because of the circumstances that we are in, you know, online is the most practical sort of format. So yeah, I wanted to, and I think what worked for the piece was because it was, there's a disconnect or a certain kind of, you're seeing something very, very white and very clean, but you also at the same time rationally knows that it's not. And actually during the filming process, it's a very, very smelly place. And within the village itself, because it's so potent, the smell and also the dust. So the workers have shifted, have been pushed to the cemetery area on the outskirts of the village, because inside the village itself, it's too, it's just too dusty, too dirty for people. Now that the density increased, so all of this that you see are tombstones, older ones. Yeah, and so after this work, I continued to collaborate with the zoonosis team at Oxford Clinical Research Unit on another much longer sort of documentary, but kind of creative documentary, maybe, because it's there's a script written, but it is very much based on the stories that I hear in the locality. So this one was a lot more involved. I spent quite a lot of time. This was shot in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, and it's a very idyllic, small neighborhood in the Mekong Delta. And I spent quite a lot of times visiting different farmers that the local vets work with. And finally invited one family to be in the film. So most of the characters in the film are just local people. They're non-actors. And there's the one main actress and two other brought in from outside, sort of to keep the story going. So it's about a pig farming household in the Mekong Delta, because again, I talk about zoonotic, or I think there's nothing more immediate than in terms of our relationship with nature than what we eat, because that's our actual like need, and what we eat is what we eat is what it eats. So there's a whole chain of results and consequences going on. So people are a lot more aware or more concerned when it comes to their food. And so this small household and sort of so what the scientists were studying at this place particularly was antimicrobial resistance, because in Vietnam there's a practice of mixing antibiotics into the animal feed, because this helped them gain weight and also help them sort of stay strong. But at the same time, this is not a sustainable practice, because eventually, you come upon resistance and it become a really big problem in Vietnam and in the region because of this very sort of unregulated usage. But the thing is, it's also apparent when you work with community and you go to places, then you realize that the big concerns of the mass or the consumer isn't necessarily the concerns of the farmer themselves, because they are more concerned with immediate consequences, such as the price of meat and the weight, the breed, what is more productive in terms of time and money input. So also what they were concerned about is also kind of more sort of everyday disease that animals have. So they were more interested in having a vet there than a scientist studying something very broad and rather abstract for them. So it's interesting to see some of those, and I think we'll talk a little bit more after that. So these two works are kind of large work that I really spend time with both scientists and communities to form. And we'll expand a little bit more in the discussion. Thank you. So.
Thank you very much, Lena. It's a great pleasure for me to discuss your work as an anthropologist working on avian influenza in East Asia. I've been really struck by your film when I saw it for the first time in 2013 at the Wellcome Collection. It was a time when I was finishing my own research on avian influenza in Hong Kong and Taiwan, which I conducted between 2007 and 2013. And I was taking this position at the Musée du Quai Branly, which is a museum of anthropology, but where there's contemporary artists involved, and I was looking for a way to describe through art the kind of tensions that I was seeing in the management of zoonoses such as avian influenza. And so when I saw your film in the installation with the noise and the atmosphere, and I could imagine the smell and the dust. So it's really a bodily experience to see that film that we don't have on the internet, of course, but we need to imagine what it means. I could really relate that to the experience I had as an anthropologist working with farmers, with retailers in Hong Kong. And I want to dwell a little bit on that, relying on my own work and of other anthropologists who have studied avian influenza in China or in Vietnam. So just as a reminder, the H5N1 virus has appeared in Vietnam in 2004, 2015, 2005, 2005, and it had emerged in Hong Kong in 1997, and it was a very deadly virus. 2/3 of the people who were infected by this virus died, but on the whole, it was not very contagious. So it was very lethal, but not very contagious. Around 800 people got infected around the world since 1997, and 500 of them died. But when the virus appeared in Vietnam, there was a major fear that it would spread all over Southeast Asia. Indonesia was a major hotspot with potentially human-to-human transmission. And Vietnam was very strong in controlling the disease at the animal level. So there was this strategy since 1997 that this new flu virus could become pandemic. And if it was stopped at the animal level, then the consequences of a pandemic could be mitigated. That's what's called being prepared for the next pandemic, which had a lot of other aspects, such as exercises in hospitals and stockpiling masks and vaccines. But this idea to control the next pandemic at the animal level was very strong in Southeast Asia, and taken very seriously by Vietnam as a way to also be integrated in the global community as a serious state. And we know that Vietnam has been very respected also for its management of SARS and COVID-19, which was another zoonosis coming from bat, but which turned out to be much more contagious than H5N1. So as you say, the virologists in Vietnam work on many other diseases that are more deadly in daily life, such as microbial resistance and streptococcus. But what makes an infectious disease such as avian influenza or zoonotic coronaviruses very frightening is that we don't know how human bodies react to these viruses. These viruses circulate among animals, but when they infect the human body, as we see with the COVID-19, most of us have no symptoms, but elderly people, and not only elderly people, have very bizarre reaction, and this unpredictability causes the fear of the pandemic, and some virologists in this school of ecology of infectious diseases said that zoonoses were a revenge of nature against humans, because we thought we had controlled nature with vaccines, but new viruses emerge and they are really unpredictable. So there is this element of fear for infectious diseases that is very rational in some way, but it also took very irrational forms for the lay public, as we saw with these images of chickens as monsters or even as terrorists, we know, with bombs around their belt, in some representations in Egypt, for example, or in the famous book by Mike Davis, The Monster at Our Door, a dark chicken with its wings attacking humans. And what I like in your work is that you give us this idea of threat and fear, with I mean this animal realm that we don't know so much because we live in cities, but yet you give us also an idea of what it means to live with animals. And so the impact of infectious diseases coming from animals is not only that it makes us sick, but as you said, it makes us reflect on what we eat. We think that eating chicken is a commodity, and chicken has become really the most commodified animal in the world in the last 40 years. Um, uh, Even if it has been domesticated in Southeast Asia 7,000 years ago, it is now a global product. I mean, the biomass of chicken in the world is equivalent to the biomass of all other birds. So it's amazing how this species has become a globalized commodity. And at the same time, when we are potentially infected by avian influenza, we remember that chickens are birds, and that they are alive, and that they have these viruses, and that's why these two representations of the bird as a commodity and as a living being produce very strange images, as I said, with the image of the monster. But you show us another image, which is the image of the humanoid, the human transforming into a bird, which is both paradise and hell, if I understand your mythical references. Um, and just to give you an instance of the kind of very parallel phenomena I found in my research. So there was a controversy in Hong Kong on the release of birds. So there were Buddhist practitioners who went to markets, and they bought birds to release them for spiritual purposes. You probably know that in Vietnam, it's spread all around Southeast Asia. It was very bizarre for a European anthropologist like me, but so there was this idea that if you release a bird, the soul of the bird will produce merit, and these merits will be accountable for you in your next life. So there was this idea of sharing souls with birds in the Buddhist practices. But at the same time, the bird watchers were very mobilized on the risk of avian influenza, showed that when Buddhists released birds, the birds died because they were stressed. They were packed in cages, so they died of all kinds of diseases, but sometimes with avian influenza. And so there was a discussion between bird watchers, virologists, and Buddhists to stop releasing birds and advise practitioners to release like seafood, like fish and shells and tortoise. And so I could see in the temples, in the Buddhist temples, images of birds that were released and transforming into cadavers. So it was a very striking image where, because the image of the bird opening its wing is very lively. It's an image of freedom, but at the same time, the released bird turns into a cadaver, and you see the skeleton behind the feathers. And I like this idea, this image of life and death at the same time, and also mixing it with spiritual intentions and gestures connecting humans and animals. And I could find the same kind of interesting mix between life, death, physicality, and spirituality in your work, because it's an image that is taken in a symmetry. As you say, it's in the outskirts of a city, of the city of Hanoi, and these people are living in this village, and they probably have some immunity, so they're not afraid of carrying these feathers. But for us, watching this film with the images of birds as monsters, we think that they might be infected by this virus. And also we think that these birds have been killed. And it's very nice that you don't show us images of birds that have been killed. In Hong Kong, it's about 1.5 million birds that have been killed for avian influenza, the same number as Vietnam. So it's really in the mind of people when they think about avian influenza, all these birds that have been killed to preserve human life. So birds are killed on a daily basis to produce community, but birds are also killed in times of crisis. And so when you only see the remains of the birds, which are the feathers, it's very light. So it's like the soul of the bird, but it's also very lively. We can feel the presence of the bird in the feathers. So I wanted to ask you to come back to this mix of life and death in the image, and also for people who have seen the film, I think we hear the conversations of people, and they talk a lot about marriage and also burial. So they talk about life and death in their community. So what was very interesting for me as an anthropologist is that you are not constrained by the protocols of virologists. You can go freely and find your own place and talk with people and meet these people. And you choose this village where there's a lot of life and death, there's a lot of community and immunity. And so can you come back to this kind of daily life of the village in the film?
I think I'm not sure if it's part of culture or if it's just part of being an artist. I think life and death is kind of two sides of one coin, and they're very close. And there's nothing, I don't feel a very like big, I think you need one and the other, and they're always there present at the same time. And so I'm fascinated with also these moments. For example, aside from the in the next film that I did in the village, where they raise animal, they also kill their own when they need to eat chicken or duck, or then they do the killing themselves. It's very common, like to buy a live or to just pluck one chicken from the backyard and do the killing. So it's a very sort of and in a way, I think it's a healthy process because you know where your food comes from, and you also have a certain respect because you raise this animal and you have to go through the dirty act of killing it to eat it. So it's a much more sort of close relationship than say you just go into the supermarket and buy a product that no longer looks like any animal. And I think if you don't really pay attention, you probably, well, I mean, if for like a bigger piece of meat like a cow or a pig, often I don't really know which part of the animal it comes from or how they look. So all of this, we have become extremely removed. And in that small village, it seems they, so people were talking about also how they maintain old tradition. Weddings goes on for a few days, and they are working in the graveyard. So they work there sometimes all night. So they spend a lot of time with the dead people. And in a way, the attitude is a very matter of fact attitude, or it's just their daily life. It's not a big separation, which I think, and a lot of times we try to find I think a very visible and concrete target for our sort of fear, but a lot of, and then we sort of fixate on this very visible aspect, but not on the actual cause. So a lot of these kind of traditions, for example, like the monk releasing, the sparrow, which also happens here, where they really pack a lot of sparrows into one very small cage, and then you see the monk opening the cage, but the birds are like stumbling out their days. They're like, they cannot fly anymore. So this, obviously, a lot of the traditions that we still keep, we sort of keep it wholesale or from what it was, but circumstances I think have quite changed, where the density is really so much higher than what it used to be. Like say a festival back in the days probably only have like a few hundred people, whereas now it's like a couple thousand, 100,000. So the scale is completely different, and same with farming or with any animal produce that we consume. The scale has just become like really, I think, much larger than what we are rationally equipped, or like basically we just cannot process it yet, and so we consume because it's there, and we keep certain practices that worked in older days but maybe don't work anymore. Just and so I don't know, I think we're always struggling to keep pace with the rate of change going on.
On this issue of scaling, so anthropologists and economists have showed that avian influenza was an opportunity for big industrial farms to receive funding from the government, because they could implement biosecurity measures that were protecting from zoonosis, whereas small farms were could not afford these measures, and so the price of these measures was too high if it was added to the price of food and everything, and so the prevention of avian influenza was in favor of big farms, whereas we know that the risk of contagion is higher in big farms, because there is this density and there is homogeneity, whereas when there is diversity, there is a kind of dilution effect that prevents zoonotic viruses from being dangerous. And so you saw in your other film these questions of scaling and how farmers manage the question of the price and the role of the vet. But can you tell us from this film, what is the scale of this activity of producing feathers? I mean, you told us that there was an exportation to China where they use turbines to select the feathers for pillows. But what is the scale? How many people are working in this village, and where are the poultry coming from?
So the scale of the village is they count by households, and then the household will also hire outside workers. So I think at one point it was maybe 20, 30 households, which was the height of it. So quite big, and they do it very manually. So they just go to a lot of the wet markets, and they bicycle around Hanoi, and they call out like buy feather. So they could buy even like if you're eating 1 or 2 duck, you could sell that feather back in the days. And so it's a very so this is also another interesting aspect, because you go to this place and it's very manual and it's very small scale, and you really don't think that it will connect to a wider chain of consumption or manufacturing. But somehow they're all connected, and same with the small household farms. Like a lot of the breeds of animals that are raised in, for example, pigs in Vietnam, it's very hard to find the local pigs now because they're smaller, and so they don't make as much of profit. So I think the most common breed is a Yorkshire or a Hampshire, so it's a UK breed. So most of the pigs in the supermarket, I mean the pork sold are from European breed types of pigs. So nowadays I think there's this convolution, like this convergence of basically things coming from everywhere and going everywhere, even from a very, very small scale that you think would you would imagine is very local, but actually not. So this is also a part that I was quite, I think, very surprised and impressed with as well. So in talking with them, they're like, oh yeah, our main customer is from China, and it just really was, not something I came to the place and had could think of. Yeah. So but
so it's
now,
part of yeah. Sorry.
but so that was the height. But I think now much fewer people do it. So maybe half. Yeah.
Half. So it's part of a metabolism process. I mean, it's the recycling of the feathers and separating from the feces, probably. But that I can imagine the smell. And I wanted to ask you on the relation between contact and contagion, because when we see these people working daily with these feathers, we think they might be infected. But and when we read books about avian influenza, we have this image of the child who kisses birds and is surrounded by feathers. So feathers is actually a main source of transmission, but and live poultry markets also, because customers are not used to being in contact with live poultry. But do you have an idea of studies that have been made in this village about their immunity to influenza?
So they, in the newspaper, they're labeled like the dangerous village, but on coming and talking to the workers, then they say that none of them got sick. But then this is also, there isn't really a study, so it's just one side is screaming by the visuals, and the other is sort of like also there's this question also, if you get sick in this time, like with this type of emerging disease that people are very suspicious of, there really isn't any incentive to tell people that you're sick, because then you're stigmatized. Or if you're a farmer, then your livestock are killed. So they're, so you lose out. So there really isn't, I feel, any incentive for a small scale worker or farmer to signal disease coming out. And usually it would be like a vet or someone get very sick and they go to the hospital. But otherwise, there's nothing for them in it. Yeah. So
I think we're going to turn to some questions.
Yes.
From the audience.
Yes, so we have a couple of questions from the audience. Nandish says, as an artist in a research lab, how was your experience working with people of science? As in India, these kind of interdisciplinary interactions are quite rare.
So it's not easy. And I'm really outnumbered because I was the only artist at the unit. So there is it would be more of an initiative of me showing interest in the research and reading up on their research and learning the lingos, the different at least the layman like vocabulary of of the science that's being studied. And then gradually also sort of, because I make visual work, so they do see the outcome. And so it's not until the work is completed that there is a little bit more of a feedback from the other side, from the science side, because then they can sort of relate to the visuals, to their work. Whereas before, I think in a way, maybe it's not so much a disinterest, but also a kind of a difficulty, because people cannot imagine exactly what an artist's role in a science research is. And also as someone coming in, you sort of have to make up that role, and you sort of have to find what really interests you naturally, and how to find that connection, because it's not in the structure. But a very fortunate thing for me is because when I started the first residency, like the first project with the Oxford Clinical Research Unit, was also when they first established their public engagement department. So they were a lot more interested in bringing the science or bringing the research outside of the lab into schools, into the general public, to create a sort of a more familiar link, accessibility, and also an understanding and interest, curiosity in science. So because of this, of Dr. Mary Chambers and the public engagement team that grew from basically one person to like now a whole team. And because of that support, I was able to continue my various collaboration with them on other projects. In a way, the timing was good for me. It worked out well. Perhaps if they didn't establish this public, and I think this public engagement department is also something that many science research units now are interested in establishing, more interested in than before in traditional kind of lab science. So maybe there is also a shift in sort of making science not so just like in its own ivory tower, but sort of trying to make it more interdisciplinary and linking it with other fields as well. Yeah, I'm sure like with the, I'm sorry, but with a social anthropologist, is it, I would imagine that Fredrik, you would have also similar.
What I just expect from anthropologists is to help them write questionnaires, because they're very aware that the questions they raise about the practices that could trigger zoonosis are not raised properly. So they want to know about the culture and practices of people before asking questions. But we're not here to give pictures. I mean, we're trying to build narrations, but just finding one image is something very hard. Often communication people do that, and it's better to have artists, because artists know more about the background. They are more immersed, I guess.
So yeah, falling on that, like there is a certain pressure to be an illustrative artist, like or sort of an advertiser. So people, when you first come, then I think what people could imagine is, okay, you're going to sort of make these posters about the science, and you're going to help them educate people. But often that's more of the illustrative or designer side, and as an artist, I think you have a more overarching interest. You have your own interest, and you're more interested in questions, I think, than just conveying a message.
Thank you, Lena and Fredrik, for that answer. Vibhu Dubey asks, can't the feathers be sanitized before exporting, since it's not meant to be eaten? What was the need to ban the import of feathers?
Yes, so they dry it under the sun, and then they have these large stoves that they dry it over. So it should be dried more or less, but at the same time, there's no guarantee, I think. And basically at that point, when there's an outbreak, then any small threat would just basically, I think elimination is better than taking the risk. So there's less incentive. So basically, it's the same rationale with killing the livestocks, that you rather kill the whole herd or the whole farm instead of checking and see which one's well and which one's not, because that's just too much risk and time consuming. And so basically the government just say, completely just kill the entire population of poultry or pig, whichever animal is infected at that time in the region. Yeah.
A pillow is a very intimate contact with feathers, because you only have a small textile. So I guess if you think about the imaginary, having bird feathers from Vietnam in your pillow, you think there's a threat because you spend a lot of time.
Yeah, I think that, and the coats that we use as well. But obviously in China, they have like more of industrial scale turbines and heating system. So it's really, by that point, it's sanitized. I think by the point it gets to your pillow. But from Vietnam, it's still considered like raw material. So yeah, higher risk. And I don't know if it affected Chinese export of feathers during that time, because they take up like 80% of the market, very large. Yeah, so I'm not sure. I have no statistic on this. Yeah.
I think that answers one of the questions that an anonymous attendee had, who asked, what is the use of duck feathers, especially what's China's interest in importing it from Vietnam? Is there anything you'd like to add there?
Oh yeah, so like Frederick mentioned, it's in the pillows, and a lot of the jackets, the very heavy duty ones for cold climate, because dow feather is a lot warmer. It keeps the bird warm, so that's why we're borrowing from the bird to keep us warm. So all of the, in places like Europe or Canada, US, any place with snow, that's what they use. Korea. So I think a big, mainly it's into coats and pillows and blankets as well. So there's a large market for it.
It raises very similar problems to the mink industry for the COVID-19 pandemic, because we have seen that Denmark has shut down its mink industry and killed, I think, 17 million minks.
Wow.
Because they replicated the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But actually, the main consumer of mink fur is China, and they have a big industry also.
So I guess it's fancier than duck. So
yes.
It's an exchange.
Exactly.
Wow.
Lena, so Birgit has a question for you. She says, thank you so much for the introduction to your work. How much knowledge about infectious diseases does the viewer need to bring to seeing the film? Is the portrayal more about re-seeing and reconsidering the labor of humans with animals, or about the animal itself?
I don't think you need any knowledge. In fact, it's usually promoted through the science platform because of its link with the science research unit that I worked with, and because it's presence in in when it was shown at the Wellcome Trust. But you really don't need it. It's more like a very sort of a brief. You're like a visitor, briefly entering this village and seeing a way of life that is in a way very strange, I think, for the average like urban dweller, what they work with, and you see this lightness, and you also know that there's a certain sanitary issues going on, but so it's I made it more as an experiential piece of yeah of having this feeling and this sort of being immersed in feathers as well, and seeing these very brief moments of human and turning into animal almost in the imagination. So I just think it's more of a feeling piece more than a documentary. It's not really a documentary.
Sure. So Vibhu wants to know, is the system not being able to adapt to new practices required for large-scale production a problem of people not adapting, or the government not putting in new regulation or practices?
Is this meant for the collecting and processing of the feathers?
Yes, yes.
No, I think it's just a custom, because it's just something that they have been doing for many generations. And in fact, I think it's a nice process, because it makes use of all the animal produce that is generated from our consumption of meat. Because then, the feathers don't just get thrown away, but are collected and recycled and used. And it's just something that made sense in the past, but maybe today. So that's why today there are less people doing it, because they can find much better jobs for better pay, and less strenuous or dusty and dirty, so but I don't know, when we try to industrialize everything, there's also quite a lot of problem that comes with that, when the scale is just crazy and you're trying to do everything efficiently, or I don't know, there's another chain of problems that come with that.
So Lena, there are two questions. I'm just going to roll them into one because we're running out of time. Mm-hmm. So Vineet says, how can art and science possibly articulate the urgent need for reducing human consumption? And Soumya asks, what impact do you think this aspect of the arts, creativity, storytelling has on the way that people can learn about science or scientific practices?
I think the arts and storytelling is comes from curiosity. So I think any sort of, if you want to learn about anything, it stems from the initial curiosity about that subject matter, and that's very important. And also mode of questioning, because a lot of things nowadays it's very complex. It's not simple, and you have to question and you have to try to look at it from different angles. I don't know how it can, but I think in science is also like a curiosity about the world, totally, very much so. So I don't see it as very separate, actually, but it's just different modes of inquiry. And storytelling, I think, is important, because what story we tell and what story we listen to reflects our value, like what we value, what we care about. And so that's why I always try to turn to mythology as well, and the various very kind of fundamental story that creates human civilization, basically, and how it reflects our changing values through time, because yeah, when we have a certain respect for things, then yeah, we can sort of be more aware and careful. But making art is in a way polluting. I think there's no way around it. I think being alive is consuming, and so as humans we consume, and we consume a lot more than we actually need. So it's just up to each person to really try their best to minimize the impact. But you can never completely eradicate your presence, because yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer, Lena. Thank you so much for allowing us to showcase your film at Contagion. And thank you, Fredrik, for joining Lena for this fascinating discussion and for sharing your insights about the film. I'm sorry if you can't see me on screen right now. I seem to be having some technical issues. But I just wanted to thank you both so much for joining us. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for coming here and attending the discussion. In case you miss watching the film, I would encourage you all to visit our website where the film is uploaded. We have a collection of stellar films which are free to watch until the 13th June, which is when the exhibition ends. You can also register for the discussions that will follow the screening of the films. If you found this program interesting and would like to know more about how zoonotic diseases emerge and why we need to pay attention to the health of animals, birds, people, and our environment, I would encourage you to sign up for Michael Bresilier's lecture on contagion across species and Umar Ramakrishnan's lecture on One Health. We will also have a workshop conducted by the ECHO Network and the Bengaluru One Health City Consortium on decoding One Health. You can find the registration links to these programs in the chat box. At 6:30 p.m. today, which is in half an hour, we have a lecture by Sylvie Brand on contemporary faces of epidemics and pandemics on how to deal with the infodemic. So please do join us there. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you so much, Fredrik and Lena, for spending time with us on a Sunday. We all hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you at our next program. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.